By the way, those of you who really care about this issue about fixing poverty, I have given you a lot of really good people to think about and read and understand better. Just as a starting point, Jeffrey Sachs, William Easterly, um, who are some of the other ones? Amartya Sen. We're going to talk about this person here, Vandana Shiva. The person you just watched in that video, Dambisa Moyo. The Duflo and Banerjee. These are just really interesting books that have very different takes on the same question that we all want an answer to: is how do you fix poverty? So this particular set of theories is called dependency, and we already talked about dependency theory, and it is kind of related to that. So here's what she says. She says people are starving because the policy structures that defended rural livelihoods and access to resource markets, and hence entitlements and incomes, are being systematically dismantled by structural adjustment programs. Go back and look in your notes if you don't remember what those are. Driven by the World Bank and WTO rules imposing trade liberalization. Remember we talked about dependency theory? Is that whole system of free market capitalism, the World Bank and all that, conditionality, it locks poor countries deeper into the system. And what dependency theory said is the best solution to this is to get out of the system while you can. And that's essentially what she's saying as well, is that the system is set up to keep the poor poor. Capitalism's development's cure is making the patient sicker. That's sort of the argument she makes. And that's kind of the same argument Dambisa Moyo makes. So the problem is the poor countries are kept poor by the rich, whether that's intentionally or whether that's just systematically or unintentionally. It's not really what we want to have happen. It's just that's the nature of how capitalism works. There's the poor get poorer and the rich get richer. So if you lock a poor country deeper into capitalism, it's going to get poorer. So if you buy that argument that the poor countries are kept poor either intentionally, but even probably what might be an easier pill to swallow is that the system itself just makes it hard for the poor to succeed. We see that nationally, we see that internationally. How do you target your foreign aid? There's a few things you can do. This is a tricky one. Number one, any aid that is given should be free of all conditionality. In other words, you don't say, I'll give you this money if you do this, this, and this. Just give the money. Don't put conditions on it. The second thing that you can do, and this is another thing that's really pushed out there, is debt relief. Is that a bunch of countries in the past have taken out loans and things like that, and now they're deeper and deeper in debt, not to mention they're still not haven't fixed poverty. So why not just sort of cancel the debt, which essentially just means that the rich states pay the debt off, not you cancel it. But let's just talk about this. So here's the deal. Let's imagine a country. Let's imagine Burkina Faso back in the 1970s. And you have a dictator in charge of Burkina Faso. Okay? So this person goes to the World Bank and says, we need money. The World Bank says, here you go, here's some money. Okay, so this person here, acting on behalf of Burkina Faso, takes out the loan. Okay, and then they pocket some of this money, they put it in their Swiss bank account, they use it to pay off people to support their power, blah, blah, blah. So fast forward to the future, this guy got the money, but Burkina Faso and the people of Burkina Faso have to pay it back. So essentially the argument goes, should these guys be held responsible because this guy was a jerk? So the argument goes that debts were accrued in the past fraudulently. The other thing is the argument about colonialism, that essentially the reason why these states are having to come hat in hand to the rich countries is because the rich countries spent the 1700s, 1800s, and much of the 1900s in colonialism, making those countries poor, taking their stuff. So canceling the debts is the least that colonial powers can do for everything they did in the past. We could maybe use the language of reparations, that you have a legal obligation to sort of give back to those countries. But just in general, this just feels like sort of the least that, say, Britain can do to Burma is to help pay off their debts because they did so much to put them in debt in the first place. This next part is a big thing for Dambisa Moyo, is that remember we talked at the beginning, is there only one path to development or are there multiple paths? And Dambisa Moyo is definitely on this idea that there should be local solutions for local problems. It shouldn't be a one size fits all. That if this worked in Britain in the 1700s, 1800s, and worked in the United States in the 1800s and 1900s, it'll work in Kenya today. Is that let Kenyans figure out how to solve their poverty problems, free from all those external things like you got to be more capitalist, you got to take out loans, you've got to do this, you've got to do that. Let Kenya figure out Kenya's problems. Let Tanzania figure out Tanzania's problems. Mozambique figures out Mozambique's problems. Local solutions for local problems without the rest of the world coming in and telling people how to do it right. And otherwise than these things, leave the poor countries alone. Now, by that, it means it definitely sort of fits with that last one we were talking about, democracy. If you just start giving money to these countries, just sort of, you essentially allow those dictators to stay in power, the corrupt to stay in power. That doesn't allow Burkina Fasites to figure this out themselves. They are locked into these things with multinational corporations running the show by putting money in the pockets of politicians. Let Burkina Faso figure out Burkina Faso's problems. But the only way that can really work is if they are free of these sort of shackles from the past. All right, so that's dependency theory. Now, I want you to just ask yourself this. Like, that may sound right, but how do you feel about essentially just saying, well, Burkina Faso, we're cutting you off. Good luck. Let us know how it goes. Does that feel right? That's a real problem with this. So, problems. Number one, this doesn't directly address the other issues. It doesn't address the issue of corruption or education and health. It essentially says, let the Burkina Faso people figure those things out. So this is where you get a real interesting conversation. Okay, we're going to let the Burkina Faso people figure this out. One of the first things that's going to happen is someone's going to say, but they haven't figured it out. I don't think they can figure it out. We have to help them figure it out. That sounds so neo-colonial. It sounds very paternalistic, very much, we know what's right, and we know what's right because we're rich, and you don't know what's right because you're poor. It almost feels like sort of the workhouses and poorhouses of the 18th century in England. I mean, it's a super messy argument. Is there a tinge of racism in it as well, that they can't figure it out because they're from Burkina Faso? Like, there's some nasty elements that get sort of built into this as well, that this is trying to overcome, but there you go. Can local leaders be trusted to do the right thing? Is it paternalistic, neo-colonialistic to even ask this? You could even say, is it racist to even ask this? That's a fair question. It assumes Marxist ideas. This definitely is dependency theory. It's definitely that Marxism we talked about at the beginning of the course. But here's the deal. If Marx is wrong about that whole chart and all that kind of stuff, and you're essentially leaving Burkina Faso out of that system, and that system actually is the right thing, then it actually turns out really bad thing to sort of leave them alone. So this becomes a part of that as well. This can look like the world is essentially just giving up on the poor countries. Well, we tried everything we could. Now we're going to let you guys figure it out. We're going to pack up and go home. Let us know how it goes. That feels like the world's giving up. And then I want to add this other element to it. So let's say you go to the United States and you say, you know what? We should cancel all our debt to Burkina Faso. Does the United States want to do that? The answer is, heck no. There's a lack of incentive to give or even lend money to poor states. And let me just explain why here for a second. There's the obvious thing of, why should we pay their bills for them? They took a loan out, they have to pay it back. All right, that's fine. That's great. But here's another element of this, is the United States likes to have states owe it money. And this, not just the United States, rich countries, I should say. But let's just talk about the United States for a second. It wants Burkina Faso to owe it money so that when it needs things, like, for example, we need help in the war on terror. Well, you owe us money. We can give you a little bit of that money back. We can give you a little debt relief if you let us you know, run some drones out of Burkina Faso against the war on terror, or to make sure that you do more free trade, or this or that. Like this lending is leverage, and it can get used, as we talked about on Wednesday with economic nationalism. It becomes a way of exerting power. So why would the United States wipe the slate clean and thereby give up its leverage over those states? All right. So here's the point I want to make about this. There's 4 different theories, and this is not exhaustive. These are sort of 4 of the main ways of talking about this. And there's a lot of different theories within each of these theories, and there's a lot of overlap, but I want to be careful about the overlap for now. But like I said, you know, you can like 2 or 3 of these. The question is not whether 2 or 3 of them are good. The question is what should come first. What do you do first? You have this aid today. What do you spend the money on today, and why? And don't say a combination of 2 things, because that just doesn't work. You can't sort of do 2. There's not enough money for 2 things at once. Let me just say it that way. You end up doing sort of a half good job at both of them, and nothing ends up happening. So pick one. What do you think is where foreign aid should be directed today? Where do you start in fixing poverty, and why? That's going to be the topic of the discussion. What we would do usually in class is we take a day and we'd actually discuss this, get into groups and figure this out. We don't really have that ability. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push the weekly reflection to next week. And we're just going to have another discussion today about this. So engage each other, have a good conversation about this. Really think about what is the best way to fix poverty. What do you think the problem is? What do you think the solution is? All right. See you later.